When I was little, I was a really big fan of a certain purple dragon, if you catch my drift. What? If you would have asked me about a little purple dragon when I was a kid, I would have thought you meant this guy. I was a Nintendo/Sega kid, so I missed the entire PlayStation train. It wasn't until well into adulthood that I actually played any Spyro games. That being said, I played the first 3 and I loved them. I was obviously informed enough, though, to not dabble in what came after. However, despite hearing not great things about the console games that came out after the initial PS1 trilogy, I never really heard too much about any of the games that came out for handheld systems. And considering they started releasing just before things started to take a nosedive, maybe there's some hope here. It all started on the current handheld at the time, the Game Boy Advance, so that's what I'll be taking a look at for this one. Today, I'm going to be checking out every Spyro game released for the Game Boy Advance. But real quick before that, I want to take a minute to talk about this video sponsor, Opera GX. Opera GX is an incredibly customizable web browser for gamers, allowing users to optimize their gaming and browsing experience by not only tailoring its appearance to your own taste, but giving you more control over what resources are used. I've used Opera GX in the past and always loved how feature-packed and adjustable everything is, and now they've pushed it a step further and gave it a total facelift, making it more customizable than ever. Deeper personalization, bold design updates, and an expanded universe of mods and modding options. The whole UI has been updated and looks way more fresh and clean, with expanded options to tweak the experience further yourself. GX mods already gave you a ton of customization, way more than any other browser, but now they've cranked it up to a whole new level with improved features and deeper customization. A light wallpaper option, new animations, custom UI font, custom UI icons, and you can even customize the GX icon in your taskbar while Opera GX is opened. They also even added custom browser sounds. And you can even customize the startup splash screen. Opera GX's quick import tool also makes it super easy to import all your settings from other browsers, and it's also compatible with all Chrome extensions as well, making it incredibly pain-free to make the switch, giving you pretty much no reason not to. If you want to get your hands on a browser that's literally better than all the other ones out there and also help support the channel in the process, click my link in the description to download Opera GX today. And thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring the video. Okay, so unsurprisingly, I'm going to be looking at these games in order of release. Some of these games do have console or other handheld counterparts, but I'm only going to be looking at the Game Boy Advance versions. And since I'm going in blind, I'm taking these games at their own merit, not comparing them to any other versions. This is just about Spyro on the GBA. All right, let's go. Developed by Digital Eclipse and released in 2001 by Universal Interactive, Spyro Season of Ice would be the first Spyro game to come out on a handheld. The whole setup and progression of this one is like a heavily stripped down Spyro 1. It mirrors the first game in a lot of ways. Unlike some other handheld versions of popular IPs, Spyro Season of Ice is an attempt to recreate the core gameplay of Spyro. Many other games end up taking a different route, like, say, creating a 2D platformer. But Spyro Season of Ice tries to replicate the 3D collectathon nature of the first 3 Spyro games. Did it succeed? Sorta. That's kind of a loaded question. The story here isn't all that important, but Spyro's on vacation with his buddies when Spyro finds a message from Zoe the Fairy on a balloon. A new villain introduced in this game, Grendor, kidnaps a bunch of fairies with the intent to have them fix a little accident he had when he magically gave himself 2 heads. Yeah, the story's silly and somehow more lighthearted than the first 3 games, but that's the setup, and because of this, the main goal of the game is to rescue all the fairies. They're basically the stand-in for the dragons you gotta free in the first Spyro game. So you go around each world collecting gems and saving all the fairies in each stage, and just like the prior Spyro games, it's a bunch of hub worlds with a set of levels in each also containing 1 Speedway level and 1 Sparks level. We'll get to those soon enough, though. The controls mirror the previous Spyro games, and truth be told, it doesn't control all that bad, for an isometric game anyway. Spyro's movement is pretty tight, and charging and gliding are both present as well. The problem is the fact that the game is isometric, so it's often difficult to judge depth, especially when gliding. Because of the fact that they're trying to stuff 3D level design into a 2D package, quite a few problems arise here. First off, well, is a problem inherent to isometric level design. You can't really see anything in front of you. This could have been fixed by, say, zooming the camera out, or at least giving you the option to zoom the camera out, but all that's available to you is the option to stand still and slightly move the camera forward. It's good that they included it, but in practice, it's pretty cumbersome and not really all that helpful. Especially considering that it kind of just like halts your gameplay because you need to stop and then move the camera. It doesn't, why? It basically just exists so that you can see if there's a jump you can make or glide over if all you see in front of you is an abyss of death, which also is a huge point of contention for me. It is so easy to die in this game by falling off the stage. Sometimes you'll see a platform in the distance and think you can glide to it, only to realize once it's too late that it's on a higher vertical plane than you're currently on and you need to just accept the sweet release of death. Is this partially user error? Sure, because in most cases you can move the camera and see, but doing this breaks up the flow of gameplay, and if you're on a roll, charging around trying not to waste your time and actually have fun with the movement this game provides you, your first thought usually isn't, wait, let me stop and slowly move the camera to see if I can make this jump. Basically, the whole thing brings down the overall fun factor here, and it probably sounds like a nitpick, but it's genuinely quite annoying. Not to mention, when you do die, you're immediately brought back to the initial spawn point of the stage, which brings me to my biggest issue with this game. Good f***ing luck trying to get back to wherever you just were. For whatever reason, this game's levels are composed entirely of rectangular structures. So each level is just a set of stage-specific assets slapped onto a giant island made up of rectangles. Everything looks virtually identical, and there really aren't any true landmarks. Coupled with the fact that you can't see what's ahead of you, you need to try your hardest to memorize these mazes they have here so you can retrace your exact steps. It's less like navigating a 3D platformer level and more like navigating the Lost Woods in Zelda. They also do their absolute best to make this as infuriating as possible, since every time you die and then you get in even the general vicinity of the NPCs in each level, you get stuck in a dialogue box and need to just spam the A button with no option to just exit. This also sometimes happens when you're just running around the level, even with NPCs you've already finished a task with or fairies you've already saved. Oh, and not to mention another infuriating situation, which happens in every single level. There's a few fairies in each level that are rescued by doing X amount of things, like eliminating enemies or flaming objects, for example. However, when you finish the task, the fairy doesn't just spawn where you stand. Instead, the game transports you to wherever that task wraps itself up. This can be literally anywhere in the stage, and if you were just in the middle of doing something else or collecting gems in a specific part of the stage you hadn't been to before, you now need to navigate back to wherever you were, which I've already explained is a gigantic pain in the ass. And they just kind of, you don't even know where you are when you get transported there. You're just like, oh, well, I guess I gotta figure out how to get back. I don't know where I am though. The thing is, even with this terrible level design, it could have all been mitigated with a map. Didn't even need a mini-map either, just a pause menu map, something to tell me where the hell to go or where I've been. But no, that was too tall of an order, I guess. The closest comparison I can make to what this game is trying to do is Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, which I'll admit isn't winning any awards, but it's a fine enough game. The difference here, though, is that game's levels are actually diverse and offer more than just f***ing squares. At times, even that game gets a little difficult to navigate, but it's nowhere near as bad as this is, and it pretty much ruins the entire game for me because outside of that, the game could have been solid. It really didn't need to do much. There are those speedways and Sparks levels I mentioned earlier, and while the speedways are okay, basically just simple on-rails shooter stages, the Sparks levels are basically just copied straight from Spyro 3. They aren't fun, and I've found through trial and error that it's not even worth it to attack the enemies. You have unlimited lives, and it just ends up being faster to tank the damage you take, since each time you die, you retain the keys you've already collected anyway. And considering whenever you die, all the enemies respawn anyway, there isn't really a point to even attack them. Look, this isn't necessarily a bad game. I can't call it bad. And if I was a kid and had all the time in the world to navigate these stages, especially for the gem collecting, I probably would have been okay with it to some extent. But I just don't have that kind of time to be wasting on wild goose chases. Spyro Season of Ice isn't really what I'd call bad, but I sure as hell won't be calling it good either. A year later, a sequel to Season of Ice was released. Spyro 2 Season of Flame very much follows in the footsteps of its predecessor, but seeks to improve so many of the prior game's issues. The setup is mostly the same here, this time around collecting fireflies instead of freeing the fairies. I won't go too in-depth about the story because, well, the story isn't very in-depth to begin with. TLDR, Ripto steals all the fireflies in an effort to drive the dragons out by making it too cold. So now Spyro has to go around collecting the lost fireflies. Ironically enough, though, the bare-bones story isn't inconsequential, and it's the catalyst for one of the biggest gameplay changes in Season of Flame. Spyro now has Ice Breath. Initially, he loses his ability to breathe fire, but you quickly get that back. Ice Breath is kind of a multi-purpose ability. It's used to attack enemies, freeze fireflies to catch them, and also a few other context-sensitive uses. There's also an upgrade to the charge, but this is more of an annoyance than an upgrade. It allows you to break big boulders, but it's all arbitrary. These rocks could have just been made breakable from the start, and all unlocking the ability does is create a situation where you need to backtrack. You do get the ability pretty early on in the game, so the backtracking isn't too bad, but it's just arbitrary padding for the sake of it, and it doesn't really serve any other purpose. There's also temporary power-up gates that give Spyro limited use abilities, but these are few and far between and don't necessarily change up the overall gameplay. They just kind of serve a small purpose here and there, and then they're done. So as I said, a lot is the same here. The levels and hub worlds are broken up exactly the same as in Season of Ice, but this time around, the speedways and spark stages have been removed. In their place are stages for Agent 9 and Sheila respectively. Agent 9's levels aren't exactly a blast, but they're fun enough. They're very basic run-and-gun platformer stages with not a whole lot of variety, but do at least an okay job of switching up the gameplay a little bit. Sheila's stages, on the other hand, are annoying. It's this weird isometric gameplay where you need to hop from platform to platform collecting gems. It's kind of like if Q*bert sucked. It's slow as hell, and using the D-pad's cardinal inputs to control the game's diagonal movement is a nightmare. It controls like utter dog shit. I'm constantly inputting the wrong direction by accident. These stages are nothing more than frustrating and slow. Luckily, they're also few and far between. The main meat of the game is obviously Spyro, and the stages are, and I say this with my whole chest, miles more enjoyable than in Season of Ice. Not only are the stages just overall easier to navigate due to having a bit more variety in design than just repeated squares, but this time they added a fucking map. Hallelujah. No part of me thought they'd actually add one considering how obvious it should have been to have one in the previous game, but good lord, they pulled through and added a damn map. If nothing else at all was changed, this one small addition would have already made up for Season of Ice. The objectives are also unique this time around. It's obviously nothing groundbreaking, but they're unique enough to not feel quite as monotonous as they did in Season of Ice. Unfortunately for me though, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but something about the camera was changed between the last game and now. I feel like the camera moves a lot more here, is like moving around. This should probably be a positive thing, but as I've said in some videos here and there in the past, I unfortunately get motion sickness pretty easily, and this game started to take a toll on me. I didn't realize at first, but once I realized it was too late. I do acknowledge that this is mostly just a me problem, but that became pretty frustrating for me. This all being said, while I was enjoying my time with the game, I will admit I didn't play all that far into it. I don't always, or even most of the time, beat the games I talk about in videos, but I do try to at least play enough to get a good grasp of the game itself. Like, I'm not gonna 100% a game just to talk about it, but I'm also not gonna just like beat one stage and pretend to have an opinion on it. I'd like to think I got far enough in the game to get a good feel for it, but me ending my playthrough when I did was not my choice. I have no idea how this happened, but somehow my save file got corrupted. Now, I was playing on a Mr. FPGA, so this may only be an emulation thing, but at one point the game crashed in the middle of me playing. This isn't necessarily all that uncommon, but usually worst case is I restart the game and lose a little bit of progress if I hadn't saved recently. Well, I rebooted the game, and there was my save file, complete with all the hours I had left the console on, which may have been the thing that led to the crash, but I mean, that's fine, right? My progress is right there, plain as day. Well, when I boot the save file up, I'm back at the beginning of the game with everything set to 0. I checked the atlas and I have 0 progress on literally everything. Even Spyro's lives are at 0. The game says I have all this progress done on the save select screen, but in-game, nothing. Clearly, somehow my save file broke, and if you've ever lost progress on a game before, I'm sure you know how it feels to then never want to touch a game again. The only other thing I could think of is some weird anti-piracy feature I wasn't aware of, like the shit they pulled in the PS1 games, but who knows. My assessment here is Spyro 2 Season of Flame is good enough that I would have kept playing it, at least a lot further than I did. It's a hell of a lot better than Season of Ice, and improves on nearly every issue I had with it. A year later, the third and final game of this pseudo-trilogy called Spyro Attack of the Rhinox would release, once again developed by Digital Eclipse. Although not numbered as a sequel and technically not directly referred to as a sequel as the first two GBA games, for all intents and purposes, it is. It controls virtually identically, the art style is similar, level layouts are similar, it's a sequel in everything but name. That being said, Attack of the Rhinox makes a very big, glaring change to how everything is structured, but I'll get to that in a minute. The story in this one is, once again, nothing too involved, which is par for the course at this point. The story in these games really isn't all that important anyway, but Attack of the Rhinox starts off with the professor showing Spyro his new inventions. This weird Ripto glory hole portal thing used to spy on Ripto at all times, and a new robotic assistant named Butler. Butler malfunctions and gets all aggro and goes on a rampage, and Spyro needs to step in and stop it. He short-circuits the robot, but then the peephole machine also malfunctions, causing the hole in the fabric of space to expand. The only way to close it is with these hearts that are scattered throughout the lands, and now Spyro needs to collect these to seal up the hole. Ripto appears and then steals the warp device the professor meant to give to Spyro. Ripto warps Spyro to Dragon Shores, and now Spyro needs to go around the different lands on foot collecting each of the hearts. And therein lies the gigantic major change in this game. See, if you haven't played this game before, I'm sure what you might be thinking is that the hearts are the main MacGuffin in a similar vein to something like the stars in Mario, the jiggies in Banjo, etc. And they technically are. But it's not the kind of thing where you go to a level, complete the level, earn the MacGuffin, and move on. Instead of the simple hub world structure of the previous games, this entire game is interconnected as one giant world. Now, this wouldn't be that big of a change necessarily if all the individual worlds were at least self-contained, but they aren't. Spyro Attack of the Rhinox is quite literally backtracking the game. This game is made up entirely of the thing I hate the most about some collectathon platformers. You can not, at all, at any point in the game, enter a new area and then finish it and move on. Attack of the Rhinox adapts this new RPG-type system where each of the hearts are earned by completing different quests. These quests are given to you by NPCs, and for the most part, all consist of an NPC giving you a list of smaller objects you need to collect. Problem is, these objects aren't scattered throughout each level where the quests are assigned, but rather scattered throughout the entire fucking game. You can play this game for hours upon hours and make seemingly zero progress, at least on paper. Sure, you technically are making progress by going through each stage and slowly collecting random things which correlate to random quests, but actually completing said quests is a completely different story. They also took away the lives in this game, which I don't necessarily dislike, but the game also is just overall way easier than the previous two, at least when it comes to Spyro stages. Which then brings me to my next gripe. So once again, they changed up the side character stages. This time around, they brought back Agent 9 and swapped out Sheila for Sergeant Bird. Sergeant Bird stages are monotonous and slow at best. They're not fun, but they're also relatively inoffensive. You float around the stages and save the other penguins by taking out enemies and slowly carrying each one of them to safety one by one. It's a slog, sure, but that's all it is, and isn't very difficult. I can't, however, say the same for Agent 9 stages. Instead of keeping the run-and-gun gameplay style from Season of Flame, Agent 9 stages are now stealth rescue missions. These are slow, frustrating, irritating. First of all, I can't stand stealth sections in games anyway. I never have, but I feel like even people who like stealth gameplay wouldn't get much out of this, and the controls are so clunky and unresponsive that I feel like at least half of the time I screw up, it's not even my own fault. And the worst part about these side missions, too, is that you get rewarded with half a key. See, there's chests scattered throughout the game that house some of the key collectibles needed to complete quests, and they're locked by keys you obtain in these stages. But beating a stage doesn't award you with a key. It awards you with half of a key. It's like this game does everything it can every step of the way to fragment its own progression. It's actually kind of insane. Not to mention, these chests are also randomly thrown into different stages, then you need to backtrack to areas which are mostly complete just to open a chest you saw like a long time ago. This game is so far up its own ass that it's honestly kind of astonishing, and I'd be impressed if I wasn't so fucking bored. You can play this game for hours and hours and not feel like you've really done much of anything, and there really isn't much platforming or combat challenge here either, so you mostly just end up feeling like you're aimlessly running around collecting stuff with no sense of progression or accomplishment. The sad thing is that they actually expanded Spyro's moveset with the different types of elemental breath and respective upgrades as you play, and this could have been used to make an interesting game with unique mechanics, but instead they just made whatever this is. So, you guys like Spyro? You know, Spyro. Spyro. Okay, so this is the one I've been dreading since I first picked the topic for this video. See, years ago, I did a video on all the Crash Bandicoot games that were on the GBA, and among them was the counterpart to this game I'm about to talk about. It's called Crash Purple Ripto's Rampage, and for lack of a better description, it was fucking terrible. As far as I know, Spyro Orange, the Cortex conspiracy, is just the other side of the exact same coin. See, these two games were made to be a pair of Spyro and Crash crossover games. Now in concept, it's actually a pretty cool idea. The two most iconic PlayStation platforming mascots at the time teaming up for not one, but two crossover games for each respective series. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me. Unfortunately, what came out was, not good. Shockingly developed by Vicarious Visions, and I say shockingly because I would expect more from them at this point, Spyro Orange is pretty much literally the exact same game as Crash Purple, both of which barely resemble the series they're supposed to be a part of. I'll admit this entire segment is essentially going to be a rehashing of what I said in the Crash video, but since I'm sure a lot of you haven't seen it, I'll just give Spyro Orange the spotlight it doesn't deserve. So the story here is that Cortex and Ripto decide to team up to take down Crash and Spyro. That's basically it. I don't need to spend more time on this story because they sure didn't. In Spyro Orange, instead of an isometric collectathon like we've come to expect at this point, a game trying to emulate the spirit and feel of the console games, we have a 2D platformer. Or at least that's how it tries to masquerade itself. See, despite each hub world being an open-ended platforming area, the majority of this game is actually made up of mini-games that have literally nothing to do with Spyro, like, at all. There's literally 3 different versions of what is essentially the exact same shoot 'em up stages: vertical, horizontal, and then just vertical but with a different sprite. A breakout clone, and any number of other ones which I can't really define, but they're all more or less just auto-scrolling stages where you need to avoid dying and make it to the end. Peppered in are some other mini-games where you just spam a specific button, but these bare-bones mini-games are essentially what the entire game is made up of. They're separated by these hub areas that become increasingly more annoying to navigate as you progress, and these areas only serve 2 functions: providing an area to collect gems which you need to unlock each of the minigame portals, and also to house these minigame portals and spread them out. These hubs may, on the surface, look like platforming stages, but all they really are is padding that separates these dog shit minigames. You need to beat all 5 minigames in each world to progress to the next, as well as find your way to the next stage once you do. There's also a hidden bonus minigame in each stage which costs you gems to play, but all that happens if you win is you earn more gems. But the cost to even play these games in the first place makes it not even worth it, especially when gems are so abundant, and many of them just respawn when you die or exit the stage anyway. In between each world or stage or whatever are bosses, which, while also are not very good at all, still are marginally more engaging than the rest of the game and actually do require just a little bit of thought and strategy. Still not good, mind you, but I struggle to find anything enjoyable about this game. Spyro does gradually receive some upgrades to his platforming moveset as you progress, like a double jump for example, but these are only used to navigate the hub areas, which are, once again, an uninteresting slog. The game is literally the exact same thing over and over and over again, rinse and repeat. You enter a stage, find the portals, open the portals, play one of the handful of mini-games that you've played a million times that this game re-rolls in every world, unlock the portal to the next stage, continue to the next stage, and it never feels like there's any variety because not only are there not really many different kinds of minigames, and they're constantly repeated, but some of said minigames are just the same fucking minigame again that the game is just pretending is a different one. It's insane. There are some shops scattered throughout the hub stages where you can buy these collectible cards from money bags, but like, who even gives a shit? That's not content. You didn't add content to your game. God, this sucks. I struggle to have even much to say about it because the game is just barely a game. And the fact that there are 2 of these blows my mind. They put in pretty much the least amount of effort possible to make a game that's already budget tier in terms of content or variety, barely even qualifying as a full-on video game, and then had the audacity to basically make 2 different skins of it and release it as 2 separate games. I can't imagine being a kid and receiving both of these games. I would have felt so cheated in a million different ways. The fact that just getting one of them would have been a letdown would have been bad enough, but both games also being essentially identical and not knowing about it and then finding out the hard way would have been like diabolical levels of disappointment. Straight to the dumpster, both of these games. So the next couple games I'm going to be talking about are, well, kind of weird to talk about, at least from my perspective. See, at this point, the console games had long since went off the rails. Long gone were the days of the first trilogy of Spyro games that everyone came to love, and the entire franchise, similarly to the fate of some of its contemporaries, took a nosedive in quality. This video isn't about all those games, but all this to say, I haven't played any of the console Spyro games past Spyro 3, which makes it kind of difficult to talk about the Legend of Spyro games for GBA. Game Boy Advance versions of a series whose main titles were console games, but also had versions for both the Nintendo DS and the Game Boy Advance. Basically, I'm going into this blind as I kind of need to judge this game in a vacuum as opposed to comparing it to its counterparts. That all being said, the first of the 2 is The Legend of Spyro A New Beginning, a game which this time actually fully takes a 2D platformer approach, and I mean fully leans into it. I know Spyro Orange is technically in the same category, but I'd hardly call its platforming elements the majority of its gameplay. The game sees you going through a handful of stages with the goal of, surprise, getting to the end of the stage. As you progress, after each main world, you unlock a new elemental power-up, each giving Spyro 3 new attacks, but I use the term new extremely loosely. They kind of all operate pretty much the same. I tend to lean towards the electricity one since it can damage multiple enemies at once, but even then, as I'll get to in a second, it's to a very large degree kind of pointless. See, most of this game's playtime is padded out by the hordes of enemies that are littered throughout each stage, and these enemies all take multiple hits to beat. It's actually pretty annoying because any kind of flow this game would have is thrown right out the window by the fact that every 2 seconds you need to stop dead in your tracks to engage in combat. Or at least that's what I would say. If it didn't dawn on me about 25 minutes into playing it that you don't really need to engage with almost anything. You can just kind of jump over enemies and tank hits, making a beeline to the end of the stage. Sure, there's the occasional enemy that's actually in the way and needs to be dealt with, but that's mostly few and far between. And even if you start to run low on health from eating hits, all you need to do to recover some health is defeat like one enemy or break one of these crystals that refill your health and power-up energy, which also barely matters because the game doesn't have a live system and also is pretty forgiving with its checkpoints. This game is piss easy. The platforming for almost the entire game, which really is only a couple hours long, is very, very basic and provides no actual challenge for like 85% of the game. And the only slight increase in difficulty are the bosses, which really aren't even genuinely difficult once you figure out what to do. More than anything, just take a long time to beat because they take like 5,000 hits. The only true increase in difficulty doesn't come until the final stage, and even that isn't even that crazy. For whatever reason, after not preparing you at all the entire game, the final level is made up almost entirely of precise platforming. And by precise platforming, I mean it's literally a stage made up of floating platforms over a bottomless pit. There's a couple enemy hazards sprinkled in, but like barely. They're pretty much just big hazards you need to avoid as opposed to enemies that need to be directly dealt with. The biggest jump in difficulty, though, comes with the final boss, which for whatever reason is actually, like, genuinely kind of difficult. To be fair, it's more so because the game kind of controls like shit and is very sluggish, making it hard to dodge some attacks or react fast enough, but it's still doable, and it's the strangest difficulty spike that comes after an entire game that's presented little to no challenge at all. The game does sprinkle in these little stages in between the main ones that switch up the gameplay, like these shoot-'em-up segments, a maze, a minecart thing, but once again, these just kind of waste your time as opposed to challenge you in any conceivable way. But hey, At least once you beat the game, you get rewarded by being able to play these sections anytime you want. What a treat. I'm not sure what the other versions of this game are like, but The Legend of Spyro A New Beginning, for the Game Boy Advance at least, is a baby game for babies. And you know, a game doesn't necessarily need to be challenging to be fun. Kirby's a prime example of that, but this game doesn't give you anything. It's just a monotonous slog that wastes your time and is over as fast as it begins. I guess the cutscene art is well done. That's about all this game has going for it, since its overall presentation looks like garbage too. All these set pieces and enemies are just muddy and blend together. Nothing contrasts or pops. It's just bad, man. The game's bad. A year later, A New Beginning would get a follow-up with The Legend of Spyro The Eternal Night, mirroring the console games. Now, this series of games is actually a trilogy, but with this game coming out so late in the GBA's life, all the way in 2007, the third game would never actually come out for the GBA. Unsurprisingly, this one is a direct sequel and continues where A New Beginning left off. The first thing I noticed here is just how much better everything looks. It's leagues better. The color palette is more appealing, everything is way more detailed, stuff isn't all muddy and doesn't blend together like it did in the previous game. Everything is just super appealing and pops, and all the sprites are more detailed. Everything just looks way better. Now, this does come at the cost of the camera being more zoomed in, and while I will say it does make the game a little bit more difficult in certain regards, it's not to an egregious degree. The setup this time is similar, but Eternal Night definitely does do its own thing. Actually, the things I don't like most about this game are the things that it carried over from A New Beginning, i.e., way too many enemies that tank way too many hits. There aren't quite as many enemies, but this unfortunately hasn't changed, and it's honestly my biggest gripe with this because, for the most part, this game is kind of solid, at least a lot more solid than its predecessor. Once again, though, you'll quickly realize that much like the first game, a lot of enemies can be avoided. This definitely doesn't feel good to do, but it's a better option than wasting your time engaging every single enemy that you come in contact with. Now, where this game differs drastically is how you progress in the overall approach to its level design. It's like somewhere in between linear platformer and Metroidvania. Don't get me wrong, this is a linear platformer through and through, but it does lift a few pages from the Metroidvania genre. Levels, although technically linear, still have an exploratory element to them, which yield you new upgrades and abilities. Basically, you can make a beeline to the end of most stages if you know where you're going, but taking time to explore these stages will reward you with permanent upgrades, and there's even some backtracking in prior stages once you've unlocked certain abilities which can open up some paths that were previously gated off from you. Even then, though, there's still a degree of exploration that's required to get certain power-ups you need to progress, so there's really no situation where you can just kind of walk straight like it's a Mario game. Because of all this, I'm not entirely sure where this game comfortably sits in terms of genre, but if nothing else, it's at the very least creative. This doesn't always necessarily translate to fun, though, especially with how the screen is zoomed in like I mentioned earlier. Sometimes it's hard to get your bearings and remember where you are, and there really aren't any distinct landmarks that help you on that front. Once again, this could have been mitigated with the implementation of a map, like, you know, how they do in Metroidvania games, but once again, we have another Spyro game that could have been vastly improved with a map, but just, like, wasn't for some reason. This game is actually a lot harder than the previous game. While A New Beginning was easy as piss, Eternal Night does actually pose a bit of a challenge, especially when it comes to its bosses. So much so that they included an easy mode in this game. It's also extremely short, which is kind of weird considering what's available in the game. There's so many ways to expand your moveset, increase your health bar and energy. There's all these upgrades that can be earned through exploration and backtracking, but it all feels kind of pointless in a game that's as short as this one is. Seriously, it's like a 2 or 3 hour game, max. Sure, seeking out these upgrades and going for 100% obviously increases the game's runtime, but when the main meat of the game is as short as it is, it makes actually having these upgrades kind of useless. I guess one good thing is that this game cuts out all the bullshit minigames from the last game, just straight platforming this time around, which is appreciated for me at least, and the music is also surprisingly good. I don't really think this one is a bad game. I mean, it definitely isn't, but overall it's just kind of mid. It's a hell of a lot better than the game that came before it, and hell, it's honestly one of the best games I talked about today, but that really isn't saying much, unfortunately. I appreciate what they tried to do, and Spyro's expanded moveset does make the game a lot more fun. You can even wall jump in this one. Expanding your character's movement capabilities kind of inherently increases its overall enjoyment level. Like, Mario 64 is a prime example of that. They made sure the movement was fun before building the rest of the game. However, in this game's case, when building the rest of the game, they didn't really do anything nearly interesting or challenging enough to facilitate Spyro's moveset options. Truth be told, the stages don't really offer much in terms of platforming despite the increased moveset. There are small bits here and there where some creativity was shown, but overall, at the end of the day, it's another game you'll probably get bored with. It's weird too, because there is some creativity shown in the bosses, with a lot of them requiring genuine thought and strategy. In any case, this game is easily the better of the two. It's a lot more enjoyable, but the enjoyment you'll have isn't really anything to write home about. Then again, the game might just end before you get a chance to get bored. And that's gonna do it for this one. With the exception of Spyro Orange, the dumpster fire I essentially had already played without playing it, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into with this one. I had no idea what the quality of any of these games would be, and truth be told, I can't really say I'm surprised at all. It's kind of a long shot for games of this nature to actually be good, but I will say the majority of these are, at the very least, not horrifyingly bad. If I had to pick, Season of Flame is easily the best out of all of these, but the first three of that isometric Spyro trilogy, overall, I don't think I'd say are bad. Not good, but relatively inoffensive. Games like Spyro Orange, though, just honestly should not have ever been made. Upsettingly bad game. The Legend of Spyro games are whatever, take them or leave them. Second game is definitely a lot better, but you're really not missing out on anything. I'd say out of everything, the first three are at least worth checking out if you're a Spyro fan. That's my takeaway here. Well, that and I probably don't want to play the Legend of Spyro console games. I don't know how to end this one, so yeah, bye. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there on the screen you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too.